Hello everyone, and welcome back to another art history. My summer has officially ended as of this past Wednesday, and I'm slowly trying to adjust myself to the new work, life, school, and social balance. And I did want to make one last video before things start getting really busy and I won't have time for my hobbies or my other interests. But although summer is officially over, I feel like I did accomplish my main overarching goal that I had for myself, which was that being buying and picking up and reading, or at least attempting to finish reading, books on subjects that I've always wanted to self-inform myself on topics that should be regarded as a lot more important and I feel like I don't know enough about. Like, for example, that being on like urban studies, I picked up a book by Jane Jacobs and I finished Death and Life of Great American Cities, and it was such an incredible book. I mentioned it in my previous video essay. I feel like it really did open my eyes and inform me on the critical study of like city planning and why it's so important to the diversity and well-being of community and where you live. And yeah, along that, I've just been trying to pick up and read a lot more other books that I feel like I should self-inform myself on through leisure reading. And one book that I've been slowly making my way through, I actually haven't really finished it yet, I'm kind of like halfway through it, is this book that I picked up from the City Lights bookstore in San Francisco. The bookstore itself is regarded as very touristy and overpriced. Please let me know if you're in the Bay Area and you know of bookstores with a really good curated selection of art history books, but City Lights is the only bookstore that I've been to that has like a super great range of books specifically on like art history theory. I was actually willing to pay $27 for this book. But thus far, it's been really interesting and enlightening and has really heavily inspired me to make this video essay. And the book is The Politics of Collecting, Race, and the Aestheticization of Property by Eunsong Kim. It really heavily considers how property, like the notion of legal property, is foundational to like avant-garde and conceptual modern understandings of innovation in art. I think this book is so unique and very originally critical in the way that it goes very deeply into understanding how the legal notions of property itself is foundational to our current modern understandings of like conceptual art and experimental poetry. And before we get started, I know the title of this video is very reactionary. I do want to make myself clear that I'm not here to position myself as an authority or claim that I'm somehow above the artists or art movements that I'm talking about, but it's really rather to share a perspective that I thought was really enlightening that Eunsong brought up in this book that I really have never read or heard about anywhere else. And even within the book, I'm only going to be honing in and really focusing on describing one specific chapter, chapter 2, and it is called Scientific Management and Conceptual Art. And it really focuses on the genre of found object art, or as Duchamp calls it, ready-mades. But before I delve any further, I do want to share with you my tea that I will be drinking today, which is a Japanese sencha green tea. I picked it up yesterday because it was really interesting. The description was like asparagus and pine nuts infused with the sencha leaves. And I'm not sure I can really taste the asparagus, but you can't go wrong with a green tea, and it's very delicious, and I very highly recommend it. I want to set the context for this critique of theory that I'll be talking about, which is more so about like a critique of labor and our corporate working system and scientific management. So in the 20th century, Frederick Winslow Taylor published a series of essays and books on scientific management that differentiated the idea of mental and hand workers. A scientific work management model that is permanently prevalent in today's corporate work environment, where there is a manager overseer model where the managerial class is signified to have a greater mental capacity and intellect to deserve more wage by directing the labor of the employees, even if the mental work of the manager isn't necessarily as laborious or physically exerting as the labor that the employees are doing. The concept of freedom in the neoliberal, capitalist sphere is defined by the ability to manage the labor process from the laborer's perspective. Like, for instance, freelance work, and in light of more recent current work trends, remote work has been super popularized. Even after COVID, it's still a really common form of work that has remained because it gives the employee more control and ability to define their labor process and how they want to work. In this prevalence of the scientific work management model with the managerial class, I feel like this is something that Eunsong talks about that is really reflected deeply within the art world that I feel like should be recognized and talked about more in the context of what contemporary or conceptual art actually means, because this theory of the work management model was brought up in the 20th century, which has actually happened to be when the height and pendulum of the modern art movement and era was happening. And I think this is also when the artist class went from understanding themselves as hand workers, kind of delving really deeply into the physical aspect of the labor of art, to occupying a position of the skilled mind worker. In conceptual art, the idea of concept is the most important aspect of the work. The idea becomes a machine. I mean, how many of us have actually looked at an art piece and asked, why is this considered art? And by provoking this question, the whole, mission of modern art is to push us to think more critically about the piece and really engage the audience to think about it. I think modernity, not just in art, holds a certain obsession with the death of traditional customs or methods of doing things. And its overarching mission is to reject these within the entity's narratives that it represents and pave the way for something totally new. And the term avant-garde itself actually originates as a military term indicating a leading formation, which was usually the group sent out first to seek the enemy and secure the ground for incoming troops. And now, as the audience, with modern art having way more complex narratives and meanings, recognizing the beauty in such works now takes an earned skill and a certain standard for intelligence to be able to say that you understand what it means. And really similarly to how academic research can be considered very elitist when it comes to prioritizing a very narrow perspective by focusing on complex language or jargon or obscure theories or topics only accessible to a select group of people who have access to that, and very effectively excluding other audience demographics from different backgrounds. Now, going back to the modern art timeline, the Dada and Surrealism movement also rose in the 20th century, and I think these, in my theory, were the two main eras and genres that really helped form and shape found object art to be what it is. On MoMA's website, it defines found object art as, quote, an object, often utilitarian, manufactured, or naturally occurring, that was not originally designed for an artistic purpose, but has been repurposed in an artistic context. In most complex conceptual pieces, but specifically in found object art, it only exists through prioritizing abstract thought as the most sacred aesthetic value. The idea, the mind work, is what is most valuable and creates the narrative and defines the object to be art. And it's the idea, the handiwork, is completely dependent on the celebration of outsourcing risk. And I'm gonna explain this. For instance, even though this isn't found object art, it's more sculptural. For instance, Richard Serra, R.I.P. by the way, is an exact embodiment of this term of risk transfer as an artist, because he was really celebrated for his dangerous sculptural ideas, these vast pieces that had to so much physical laborious handiwork on and could prove to be dangerous to be actually built. Even though he's the one who created the idea for all these crazy sculptures, he was never really involved in the physical labor making of these sculptures, if you didn't know. But by using this outsourced labor of other artists to do the kind of dangerous, laborious aspects of building the sculptures for him, he actually ended up injuring a lot of people and even killed someone, which is very obviously a very extreme example of the radical value separation between mind and handwork, but you kind of get the idea. The avant-garde basically allows risk-taking and the idea of risk transfer to become aestheticized and regarded in the public as innovative. One of the most, or maybe I should say the most, well-known Dada and found object artist was Marcel Duchamp, and I'm very sure at some point in your life you have seen the infamous fountain toilet bowl piece that he did that was very controversial, or his bicycle wheel piece. He was really well known for seeking this alternative way and form of art than just representing objects in paint, because he kind of presented the objects themselves as art. And he usually really selected very mass-produced, utilitarian, very commercially available objects and designating them as art and giving them titles, such as fountain, when it's actually just a normal public urinal. He's the one who coined the term, quote, ready-made. It's really interesting the way other artists speak of him and talk about Duchamp as if he almost freed them. Like, for example, Ed Ruscha, very popular pop artist, describes Duchamp as someone who, quote, revolted against an academic slavery that artists previously followed traditionally and discovered common objects. Duchamp's entire artistic authority was built upon legitimizing common objects into an exclusive field of art, of understanding art, and performing this kind of fathering duty. Like, the piece does not become a piece until Duchamp, the father, decides it to be the piece. And this very radical, like, transmodification of perceiving an object as art kind of really insinuates the artist being able to have the hand at playing God. And this transformation of it being from normal to art, like, that transformation, it belongs to Duchamp. Like, this discovery process of narrative is owned and created by Duchamp. But I guess my bottom line is trying to say that we, as the audience, need to recognize that this elitist capitalist structure of separating mind work from handwork is not just existing in the corporate business sphere or academic elitist spheres. It is also very present and even more real, if I dare say so, in the art world. Now, this quote from the chapter specifically by Eunsong I thought was really, really interesting. Quote, "In the aesthetic transfiguration that becomes property, the artistic freedom afforded by the Duchampian tradition is invoked to shield artists from criticism." This idea proposed by her sheds light on the negative impact of contemporizing art complexity, of the rise of young pseudo-intellectual artists being kind of granted this ability to deflect any form of negative criticism or any provoking opposition to the art that they create by deluding themselves with false notions of intellectual superiority and being able to just dismiss it with a simple, you just don't get it. However, like I said in the beginning, I know the title's super reactionary, but I do understand that there are two sides to viewing this argument. I have a really specific example, and there's been this one account that has really been catching my eye that I follow and I find, like, really, really funny. Northwest MCM Wholesale. Now, maybe I'm just, like, very, very chronically online to the point where my algorithm has fine-tuned it so much to the point where I now regard their videos as recognizable and pretty popular at this point, like, in this niche focal point of algorithm that I exist in. But anyways, I'm still going to show you the first video that I ever watched from this page.
Welcome to my vintage showroom. Notice I said showroom and not store. That's because there's lots of room for me to show you what I've curated. Like this chair I've curated, it's so cinematic. Unfortunately, it's part of my permanent collection and therefore not for sale. Do you collect vessels? I love vessels. I've curated a huge collection of bespoke vessels. What are they for? I just told you they're vessels. Unfortunately, it took me 5 years to curate all these, so they're not for sale. Isn't that table incredible? It's actually not vintage. It was handcrafted by an amazing local artist. Yeah, he's a homeless Iraq war veteran with Down syndrome, and we've become great friends since I started curating his stuff. It's actually on hold for Tobey Maguire right now, so it's not for sale.
Like, not only do I find their critique on current trends in younger media culture and the desire to be very individuated and unique, but somehow vainly ending up in their own cringe commodified media aesthetic by holding the desire to be different. I honestly find their videos to be a certain form of art. And honestly, this sounds like I'm also being satirical or over-exaggerating for irony purposes, but I genuinely think that this creator is the first of any online creator that I've seen, please correct me if I'm wrong, to make such videos like this using artificial intelligence. It's just really accurately portrayed in this circular, insane, post ironic form of creating its own piece of media art.
Oh, hey babe. Done with work early, I guess. Yeah, I had to quit my job today. I just couldn't handle the stress of working at a non-vegan coffee shop anymore. Plus, my boss's Spotify playlists were just too toxic. So yeah, I guess I'm gonna be a couple months late on rent again this month. Whoa, I don't feel comfortable having this conversation with you right now. You know how bad my anxiety has been ever since our singer got canceled. Look, I think we should just open up the relationship.
And I don't know, maybe, like I said, I'm just really chronically online, but it's something I find really funny and entertaining and kind of find to be actually really beautiful. I haven't really ever seen anything like this, and this is something that I find honestly to be absolutely original to the creator, even though it's very clearly AI generated and something that they did not technically make or draw or truly 100% create themselves, because they didn't really technically draw the characters or do the editing effects, because these are all technology and AI generated prompts. But it's basically a perfect example of how art can transcend the physical form and emphasizes the value of the idea of what makes it funny and what makes it art. I mean, the whole controversy behind AI art is that it's not ever actually technically new art, because it's kind of just technically drawing upon various sources of pre-existing art from real human artists that have produced it in the past and uploaded it on the internet. I definitely do agree with that this is a stripping of the process of what should be considered the labor of art and the epitome of the critique of separating mind work from the handwork. And obviously the argument on AI art is still very new and very tricky and very broad, and the way I just described it was very boiled down and watery and did not go into the extent of it. So, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into the elitism of found object art, I want to make it clear that I'm not here to tear all contemporary conceptual forms of art down. What I'm trying to get at is that we kind of need to be more aware of how these elitist structures, where thinking is put on a pedestal above doing, is not just present in the corporate business sphere like Google or the academic research paper sphere, as a lot of people assume it to only exist in, but it's very alive and very much well present in the art world as well, that we need to recognize. Instead, I'm just trying to invite all of us, whether the people on this channel are artists or viewers or critics or just enjoyers of art, to think a little bit more critically about, rather than the art, but the overarching structures that exist to evolve it. So honestly, at the end of the day, most importantly, keep appreciating art in all its forms, whether it's something you make with your hands or something you conceptualize in your mind, or something, I guess, with these video essays that you choose to share on the internet. But with that being said, I literally haven't even finished the book itself. I was talking about one chapter of this book, The Politics of Collecting, chapter 2. So I still have yet to finish it, and if anyone else who is watching this is interested in reading it, I really highly recommend it. With that being said, I hope you learned something from this. I hope this was able to open your insight on being able to appreciate all forms of art, and it inspired you in some sort of way. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next art history lecture.